Oh yeah, little Santana live there at Woodstock. I don't know, maybe some of y'all weren't even born then. But hey, man, one thing you could say about us here, baby boomers, we did bring the world rock and roll. So enjoy it. How is everybody? Hey, Linda Espinoza, how you doing? Ganya, good to see you. And Doug and Rick, what's up? I saw Brandon. What's up, brother? Good to see you. And all the rest of you. Hope everything is going good. Had to do something yesterday, and anyway, back in the saddle again, as they would have it out there. So, speaking favor over us all, nothing missing, nothing broken. You speak it, it becomes real. You get it down inside of you, it will transcend the barrier. So, anyway, DC, what's up? Good to see you, Cheryl. Elderberry, good day to you, sir, as well. So, um, it's Thursday, isn't it? Worlds. Yeah. I thought about this subject for a long time. And it's one that, again, as I wrote in the description box, that it would seem to be morbid, but it's not. In fact, death is the number one preoccupier of our thoughts, our minds, our consciousness. And the reality of the topic, death, uh, here in the West, Western culture, we've been, I can say this, most of us have been taught wrongly about death. Because in Western culture, the spiritual is absence. It's replaced by materialism, wealth, leisure, gain. It goes on. And when you look at that basis, then death would represent loss, separation, and then thus it's feared. Western culture and religion preys upon the same thought. You're taught to fear death. The truth is, if you look at this from an Eastern perspective, death is perceived differently. And for thousands and thousands of years, it was not something that was feared. It was something that, does this surprise anybody? Is actually was to look forward to. It was a release because this realm, this is the death realm. Each of us are experiencing it. And what makes death such a unifying, weird thought is that it impacts all of us personally, one on one. And that is the great equalizer. No matter what you think you are, no matter what your position may be perceived or otherwise, you're going to die, sucker. You're going to be just like the rest of us. Your stinking ass, rotten body is going to die. And that scares people. You think about it. The whole mithra of angels and demons is predicated on the fear of death. The thing about the theme in Western culture and religion, and to a great deal philosophy, is that we really don't understand death. Therefore, our philosophies, our theologies are usually wrong. We see death in the modern world, again, as separation, loss. But a little factoid here, death, the death industry is actually, if you're an entrepreneur and looking for an entrance, well, they got it pretty well sealed off because death is the evergreen business plan. You're always got customers, always. It doesn't matter. Death as an industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and oddly enough, it's controlled by a very poquito group. True. Yours truly at one time was actually fully licensed in the state of Texas to actually sell you death. Make your provisions. Yeah, big business. So they get you coming in and they get you coming out. It's death, man. It's slavery. It is the rules here of this reality is bizarre. But we're led to believe that this is real. You can have all your foo-foo philosophy and metaphysics and New Age and religion, but when it really gets down to it, what's going to happen when you die? Again, this is the death realm. And the truth of the matter is, you're only visiting. All of us are. There are no permanent residents here. We're all just kind of passing on through, as they would say. And when you get real honest with yourself, answer the following questions. And hello, everyone in the chat room. Bonnie, Paul, Joe, good to see you. Lori, Lost in Space, Mary Wins, much love to you, darling. All right. Wayne, this is temporary. That's what I said, Bonnie. This is only temporary. You're passing on through. But anyway, so I'd like to see this in the comment section on the replay. But those of you in the chat that are listening, thank you. So what do you really know about death? If you had to put it down, let's say your life depended on it, what would you describe in one sentence? What do you know about death? Another question is, do you fear death? Be honest. And then if you do, what are you afraid of? I mean, this is getting right down to the core of our existence, each one of us. Because technically, you, and I would call someone's name out, but I don't want to do this. You're already dead. I'm already dead. I have passed through this death realm. The greatest thing that I have come to understand in my liberation from religion and the God spell is that I'm just passing through. This is the death realm. I can see what it teaches us. I mean, if you go with the thought, are you mortal or are you immortal? Kind of gets into that discussion we had last week. Well, is the spirit immortal and the soul mortal? And then how many different kinds of death are there? In my experience in near-death experiences, and I've had a number of them, like many of y'all have, I can't say at any time when I was afraid. When that transition zone was coming up, I didn't feel any fear. Many, unfortunately, don't understand that in some cases, death is nothing more than a sleep. Some say that we're asleep right now. And again, technically, if you believe in the future, how many of you believe in the future? Raise your hands. Come on, raise your hands. Sure you do. Then you're dead. I don't know what your death was. I hope it was a pleasant transition. I don't know if you were murdered. I don't know if you were in an accident. I don't know if you died by natural circumstances, but you're dead. I hope you enjoyed your life. That's the reality. And so if that is the reality, then we've got to begin to, let's examine death. If we live in a duality realm here, then death is actually life. Because we died coming in here. We call it birth, but that's not true. You had to be dead to come in this realm. Fact of the matter is, each and every one of us, if you're hearing my voice or seeing my image, you're dying right now. I'm dying. We die. No matter how many seconds, you want to call it minutes, you want to call it hours, days, weeks, months, years. The death process is ongoing. And it's meticulously slow. Nothing sudden about it. And it's interesting when you look at death as what we perceive to be life in a corporeal body. We have mass. We don't understand these bodies. We think we master them, but it's actually not that way. The body has a way of overruling your mind real quick. But what I'm really looking at is that I'm looking at a manifestation of death. And if you really get into it, it's quite fascinating. I died to come into this realm, then I will be born through death to enter in, which is, folks, believe it or not, it's apparently a very pleasant place. The experience of death is said to be orgasmic. Makes sense. Even in those times when the living essence is pushed out of the body, blunt force trauma, etc., it's in that transition. Now, how you have been taught, whether you're deeply religious, whether you're not religious at all, has a huge impact. In this study that we're going to get into, we're going to look at different cultures, different funeral rites. Why do we do it? Why do you go to a funeral home? And isn't it odd that it's called a funeral home? Huh. A morgue is where you will eventually end up. Now, for myself, it's cremation. No need to take up any more space than what I already have. I'm grateful for the experience. I understand what death is all about. And that's just the reality. Now, I also want to say, 11/11/23. I may even try to do a show on Saturday. Since death is the inevitability, and since death is where the puppet master is pushing humanity, then there's going to be a lot of it. I mean, answer my question here. Are you expecting someone to be waiting for you on the other side? Do you expect help on the other side? Do you think that someone's going to usher you in and being able to understand the other side? Do you really believe that someone's going to take care of you, that will have love for you, that will actually, or are you going to be thrown into a void that has its own rules, its own hierarchy, and is it scary? Or is it a place where you learn your power? You have the opportunity to grow. And if you really understand, you can go anywhere you want. Anyway, so, Brandon, how are you doing? Yep. It's interesting, Brandon. I'm going to be doing a show on the fact that there is a war taking place. It's not our war. This war is literally a war of the heavens. Not ours, but boy, are we in the thick of it. It's like, man, it's like when you were young, maybe you still are, but remember what dating was like? You ever had a date where you go, oh, crap, I just found out what hell was about and what a demon is, yeah. But, yeah, so let's get into this. It's a fascinating subject, and I'll guarantee you how long the series go, that by the end of it, there should be no reason for you to have any fear, and you can actually be a help to others. If you have a death in the family, know someone who died. And if you attend the burial rituals, and the rituals are really bizarre, but you can be a real comfort because most people fear this subject. Not us. We say, let's bring it on, baby. And I think I should have played the song, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And when I die and when I'm gone, there'll be one child born in this world to carry on. I hear the song in my head right now. And many of you do too. So here we go, folks. So I'm going to, we've got literally 20 plus papers that we're going to go through on death. And it's very fascinating. It really is, because you're going to question yourself. You're going to agree, and some you're going to disagree, and some's going to be like, you're freaking kidding me. But yeah, and we're not the only ones who've thought about this thing called death. Death is life. Death is actually the spirit of life. We've been taught that it's a spirit of death, but with death comes life. Yeah. Hey, I didn't invent this place. Someone said, hey, and I looked, and next thing I know it was here. So, and this paper is titled Death is a Transition. Time at the Door of Eternity. Wow. Just stop and think about that. I don't know what your mental perception of eternity is. I see myself as though I'm on the precipice of the threshold, and it's beyond description. But anyway, what did Pythagoras have to say? He wrote, and when, after having divested thyself of the mortal body, thou arrivest at the most pure ether, thou shalt be a god, immortal, incorruptible, and death shall have no more dominion over thee. The golden verses. This is from Francis Bacon. You know him, Shakespeare, the guy who wrote the New Testament. I can't be talking about that. He wrote, death exempts not a man from being, but only presents an alteration. An essay on death. Hamlet professed to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whom's born no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. So synopsis of this paper is this, and there's a number of chapters on this. This is chapter 5, presents a stepwise explanation of the three principles, transitional stages involved in the cycle of reincarnation, which is physical death, postmodern existence, and rebirth. It is clearly demonstrated that, contrary to the scientific dictums that death equals the extinction of consciousness, that's not true. And since time immemorial, the philosophy of Perennis has taught that death is both transition and release from earthly bondage, not an extinguishment. The topic of apparitions is taken up, the emphasis now placed on explaining such phenomena in terms of how is it that a strongly earthbound nature, or else unfulfilled desires and appetites during earthly life, can temporarily energize the post-mortem psychic vesture? That's a good question. Writer Lee and I are working on something that'll be next spring, but this is going to be fun. Stay tuned for details. The exposition draws heavily on the core occult doctrines presented earlier on the composition of man and his vehicles of consciousness. And notice the word vehicles is plural, not singular, particularly that which serves as a bridge between the mortal or personal and the immortal, or divine elements of man. I see more often that if the soul does exist, it is mortal in every way. Whereas the spirit, I cannot find a beginning for the spirit. But that's just my philosophy. Further, eladication is provided from poetically and literary works of sublime mystical vision. Permanently, the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Scientific and photographic evidence is adduced in support of some of the occult tenets. Now, it's interesting because I think we can all admit this. If you've been a supporter or follower of this channel, we study the occult. And who would have thought? It's like, wow. So that's where that belief that I believed in came from. Had no idea. Yeah. And it's like your virginity. Once it's popped, you ain't going back, man. There ain't no going back. It's true. They even tell you that. Further scientific evidence from mediumship and after-death communication is cited in support of claimed memories from a past life. If you're a medium or if you channel, what are you channeling? Are you channeling original thought? Or are you channeling merely a memory? A residual energy, as Ryder and I spoke about on his show on Tuesday. I mean, what's happening here? Are people really channeling in real time with a dead person that, is over now into what we were told is death? As indispensable elements of postmortem existence, the concept of heaven and hell are examined. It is no exaggeration to say that ideas concerning these range from the vague to the ludicrous and abound in popular millennial and orthodox religions, as also in science. Therefore, no effort is spared in explaining carefully the exact meaning and significance of these admittedly inflammatory terms. A major section is devoted to explaining how the fate of an incarnation depends critically on whether the connection between the personality and higher self is maintained and strengthened or weakened and severed. Since this is a complex chapter, it is fully illustrated and closes with a summary and postitude. Shall we get into it? Unfolding consciousness. This chapter presents an overview of the principal stages and associated states of consciousness of man after physical death, and the process that impelled him towards the rebirth. Whereas there are a myriad of complex details to consider in exploring the undiscovered country, we necessarily have to confine our attention to the key features of the post-mortem and reincarnation process. Now, I can't question that for me, reincarnation, I have issues with it. There's gaps. But no matter how you look at it, death is a form of reincarnation. If the paradigm holds true that this is duality, then its very real potential is that we've been taught wrongly about this subject of death, that we're already dead. And in a sense, your death will in fact be a reincarnation experience. Now that I can hitch my wagon up to that. Drawing upon the occult teachings referenced in the endnote 2 through 5 in order to highlight the fact that consciousness is ubiquitous. It cannot be extinguished, It never dies. In other words, using the simile of ice, water, and steam being phases changed of the same H2O, death and the postmortem state are but changes of phases of consciousness, which is unaffected by different phases, states of itself. So that implies that each of us, when we die, we're fully we're fully aware of what's happening. The memories don't stop. The process of experience continues. You got to think about that. That's pretty trippy. We've seen it in Hollywood and in literature where the person is dead, but they don't realize they're dead. And then they ask the immortal question, am I dead? Or how's this one? Is this death? And by the way, is death your enemy? Or is it your faithful companion rescuing you? Think about that one. Sending out an SOS. Yep. Anyway, first and foremost, we have to ask the question, what exactly do we mean by death? In occultism, the meaning is not quite as straightforward as the everyday sense of the term. And is there just one death? In fact, there are two deaths, which logically means that there have to be two births. The first death is obvious, but the second one needs explaining. Accordingly, the transition of man's consciousness after physical death and towards the subsequent rebirth is described in three principal and well-defined phrase of transitions. They are A, from physical life to astral life, B, from astral life to spiritual life, and finally C, from spiritual life to a new terrestrial life. The term astral is used as the best available term in English to refer to the psychic realms that encompass the broad, intermediate planes ranging from the physical to the spiritual. See Chapter 3, Table 2. Then follows an explanation of how and why apparitions occur, since such appearances are directly inexplicable in terms of the post-mortem states of man. Let us start naturally with the transition of consciousness from physical existence. We're all going to experience this. So I believe that we put this into our consciousness, it then begins to get interwoven, and at that moment when that knowledge is needed, you're going to be able to refer back to this very moment. You won't forget it. All right. An understanding of all that death involves depends on a proper understanding of the total constitution of man during physical life. That is why it is said that the key to the secret of death is held in physical life, so progenically expressed in the prophet. You would know the secret of death. But how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. So it would be useful to recapitulate briefly that man, as a unit of consciousness, functions on earth through 7 principles, which may be grouped in several ways, as described in Chapter 2 and 3. But for the better understanding of death and rebirth process can be grouped into the following: the individuality, which includes the upper triad, comprising of A, Ultima, the divine self, in conjunction with the upper duad and latter comprising of B, the Buddha, the spiritual soul being the vehicle of the Atma, and C, the Manas, the human soul or mind in its higher aspect. Second, the personality. The middle duad, the animal soul, the psyche comprising the karma, manistic duality of a manas in a lower aspect with the karma or desire. The lower triad, comprising of A, the prana, the life force, B, the linga sarvaya, the etheric double as a vehicle, and the stula saraya, the physical body. The above esoteric taxonomy is shown in the pertinent columns of chapter 2. It is reproduced in this chapter for the first two columns of Table 210 overleaf, which portrays man during physical life and the two main stages of his post-mortem consciousness. And we'll get into this and you'll see the charts. And by the way, I have this on PDF if you want it. All right. First transition. Death represents a phase change of consciousness from physical life on earth to astral life in the koma loka. I love these words. Man who is physically born must eventually physically die. But what exactly is physical death? From the standpoint of materialism, it means a cessation of the function of the brain, heart, and other bodily organs. This is obviously so, but there is more to consider. The popular idea that loss of brain function means the extinction of consciousness is not upheld nowadays by enlightened scientists and psychologists, and certainly not in occultism, which teaches that physical death is transition. The same H2O existing as ice, water, and steam are all three phases at the triple point is an opposite simile for the transfer of consciousness to different phases of states of itself. Well, I love that. That's kind of good news, you know? The various phases of the complex transition process are now described in unavoidably stylized fashion purely for simplicity's sake. Physical death and immediate after. In the course of dying and immediately afterwards, the lower sentient consciousness, which is of course held in subjection by the brain and physical senses, is extinguished with the death of the brain and senses. However, the higher consciousness survives forever because its roots lies in eternity. Memory is therefore dislodged from the physical brain. Furthermore, the Maya Rupa, the illusory body, fully explained in the previous chapter, may appear to loved ones as a materialization of the newly departed person during the early transition stage. A typical example will shortly be given, but refer also to the general outline given in the previous chapter. And we'll get to the previous chapter. Postmortem consciousness in the Kamala Loka. Physical death signifies the loss of the lower triad. In the same way as the physical body is the lowest vehicle of man's higher, non-physical six principles during earthly life. So the Kama Rupa now becomes the lowest vehicle of the same man's higher three principles after death. We'll see that in the tables. Soon after physical death, a review of the past life occurs in the Koma Luka, also known as the Amity, in Egyptian mythology. Hades in Greek mythology, the purgatory in Christian theology. You see, The Christians didn't make this shit up. They got it from somebody else. They just like to make claim of it. All these terms signify the realm of the dead, or rather, a stratified intermediate state of consciousness after physical death in which the soul must undergo purification so as to achieve the holiness necessary to enjoy the state or consciousness of heaven. Okay. Again, heaven could not necessarily be a place, but a destination. You know, like going to New York. Now, purgatory, of course, is based on Dante. So here are the tables that we've been talking about. And you can see each stage that we were just talking about. So this is the death principle. Let everyone have a chance. And if you're listening, I'm sorry. I described it earlier, but to do it again would become almost redundant. All right. Purgatory may be likened to a school examination room. We all can appreciate that. I mean, yeah. Those who miss the mark are demoted to be disciplined by more hard study, and those who pass move upwards to the next higher class and possibly also receive their prize on the annual speech day. Well, that's far out. Boccielli's depiction shows various trances, each corresponding to a particular characteristic state of consciousness of the inhabiting entity. Well, that's far out because I guess technically you and I are all entities. And don't we look fine, ladies and gentlemen? Exactly. It also is the case that the punishment fits the offense. So fittingly, the proud are forced to bend double under the weight of heavy boulders. I don't know if I agree with that, but okay. And the gluttons have to chase in vain around the tree lane. You see, to me, that's just hokum. I mean, so when you look at this, and let me just counter with this, the lustful. So what the fuck does that mean? I mean, if I lust after knowledge, what? Is that bad now? The gluttonous. So is that really about eating? I mean, how primitive can you be in your mind to this stuff? But anyway, you know, they have the avarice, the prodigal, the slothful, the wrathful, the envious, the proud, yada, yada, yada. The late repentant, the negligent, and the excommunicated. Well, that's where I am. Hell, they kicked me out. If I was to walk through a church door, my God, they would think that the devil itself walked through. And they'd be right. So let's continue. Listen, we're going to read a lot of stuff, and we just have to, you know, kind of go with the river. Go with the flow. It must be stressed that the life review is not in any way concerned with the personal details of the former life. Well, there you go. But solely with its spiritual content. Today, I think that there would be a problem for a lot of people. There's just real lack of spirituality. You look at all the things going in the world. You can't tell me that shit's spiritual. Ain't nothing like it. But anyway, in order that those spiritual elements can be distilled and assimilated into the higher self. Let's go back here a minute. Distilled. Isn't that an interesting term? I mean, when I hear that, I think of moonshine. I think of alchemy. And that's what it really is. I mean, I met a couple of the moonshiners back in the day. It is, in fact, distilled spirits. There's something within the containment of alcohol and sugar. And when you heat it up and you put all this together, and it somehow begins this transmutation into a substance that, if you drink it, will alter your consciousness. And that's why they call it spirits. Now, you notice they don't do that with marijuana. They don't do that with LSD, with psychedelics. They don't call them spirits. They should, but they don't. Interesting. I know. Sometimes I take a little side trips, but yeah. All right. So it's distilled and assimilated. Well, Paul wrote about a similar experience. He said that all of us pass through a fire, and then what is left, the good, if you have any at all, according to their terms, that's where you get your crowns. Yes, New Testament theology teaches that those who got the golden ticket, you get a crown, and not just a crown. There's at least a half a dozen crowns that you can get. And then you get the rock. Yeah, that apparently has your name. And then you have the seal. Wow. So to be distilled and to assimilate. Now, I wonder what that feels like. I mean, unless you believe that the spirit can't feel. Apparently it can't. All religions, all occultists say it does. Wow. Okay. And every time I see that word assimilated, I can't help but not think of the Borg. Resistance is futile. Your consciousness, your essence will be added to the whole collective. No individuality is what it's saying. All right. Furthermore, it is important to distinguish between what may be termed panoramic memory and the more profound life review, when the event is experienced from many angles, which includes significantly the inside-out experience of being on the receiving end of causes enacted during life. For example, a person who deliberately causes hurt to a loved one during life will experience the effects of that hurt upon himself. Isn't that just another word for karma? The principle of the golden rule of treating others as we ourselves would wish to be treated is a maxim found in practically all religions and cultures. I.g., the Bible, the rule of do as you would be done by yourself, is therefore an inexorable universal law. With the ending of this review and its consequent striking of the keynote for the next incarnation, unconsciousness supervenes, not in the sense of extinction of consciousness, but more like the state of deep, dreamless sleep. And that has been taught for me. That's how they say the Old Testament folks of the day. That's how they view death, is that there is this sleep. You're going to wake up, but apparently we expend so much energy in this transitional death realm that apparently some of us, all of us, need to be recharged. I believe that. I believe that there's some foundation to that. All right, so let's talk about the second death. The life review is followed by what is known in occultism as a death struggle, which seems to imply a conscious experience of suffering and pain but is in fact the natural separation of the higher ego from the personal elements in man's experience. The two modes of functioning of the one manistic mind principle were described in chapters 2 and 3. The struggle is between the higher manas and the lower manas, the former in association with the Buddha, comprising of the upper duad, and the latter identifying with karma, constituting the middle duad. Therefore, follows a gestation period in order to assimilate, to digest the spiritual aroma of the past life into the higher egoic, there we go, entity described in the next section, unless there are unusual circumstances in the former earthly life, such as a premature death by violence, suicide, or other reason. The gestation period for the average person may last for many years in terms of earth time, after which consciousness returns in the sense of an awakening from the state of deep slumber. Oh, come on, folks, that's worth your whole hour. It's concisely said. I mean, again, this is a thought, a theory, but it's referenced by many different occult references, as you've already seen. The enigmatic question of the time period in Davakian will be elaborated shortly. Meanwhile, we now progress to the second transition from astral, psychic, conscious to spiritual consciousness. The second transition from astral life to the spiritual life. The separation of the immortal upper duad from the lower portions, which remain as the kama rupa, is known as the second death, as just described. It is profoundly significant and well symbolized by the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. Divested of the impediment of his last mortal remnants, man is reborn as his true immortal self, the upper triad, on the higher plane known as the Davakian, there to remain until the hour for a new physical incarnation arrives under the divine law of harmony and adjustment, karma. This is depicted in the third column. Reborn here does not exactly mean reincarnation, which is explained shortly. Out of several examples that could be cited from philosophy and religion regarding the significance of the second death, the following two are striking. The Poltrek says, the death we die is of two kinds. The one makes man 2 out of 3. The other makes him 1 out of 2. Well, that's just as clear as Mississippi mud. I get it. So we die 2, which makes us then 2 out of 3, and the other makes him 1 out of 2. That's new math, by the way. By using the simple division of man into spirit, soul, and body. Okay. The first death is the loss of the body, leaving man with 2 out of 3. And for some reason I hear, Meatloaf. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Anyway, bad out of hell, right? And the second is the withdrawal of the spirit from the Kamra Rupa, making 1 out of 2. Recall how the biblical story of Nicodemus, the ruler of the Jews who visited the Christ by night, hoping to find out more about his teachings, since no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God be with him. And in reply, Jesus pronounced, know this when you're taught this one in, Sunday school. Verily, verily, truly, truly, I say unto you, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Now, there has been one particular religion that has hijacked that, and it's not what they actually teach. But anyway, and it's also true that the Christ did speak of a second death. Now, in that mind worm, the second death is total obliteration. Yeah. No, that'll scare the crap out of someone, wouldn't it? Well, I don't want to die again. Relax. Your energy. Being one of the Pharisees, therefore, fastidiously in keeping the letter of the law, the dead letter esoteric interpretation of the Jewish faith, the perplexed Nicodemus remarked, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? There are at least two profound inferences that can be elicited from the Christ admittedly enigmatic comeback that man must be born again. The first one is in line with the second transition just outlined, but one could hardly expect the Savior to impart esoteric truths to the Aramaic tongue to the literal-minded Nicodemus about the disintegration of the chrysalis, the Kamarupa, to release the butterfly, the immortal triad of Atma, Buddha, and Manas. In the Devakin, instead, he states, the wind blows where it wants, and you hear the sound, therefore, and cannot tell where it comes from, whether it goes. So if everyone that is born of the Spirit, the Christ then points out that what a man sees and understands depends on his state of consciousness. Well, that's a variable that you could never put into a mathematical equation. You couldn't put that into a program, because you would have to, first of all, be able to define how many states of consciousness are there. All right, let's continue. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto you, you must be born again. Then to the still bewildered Nicodemus, if I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you heavenly things? Now, the word heavenly can be easily translated into spiritual things. And from what I was taught about Nicodemus, he was no dumbass. Now, again, this is within, the Judeo-Christian belief system. But there's much truth within those words. You can't summarily reject them just because maybe you've moved on. How about that? Let's see. This is but cursory insight into the Savior's transcendent words about being born again after the second death. Also so perplexing to Nicodemus, who could not figure out how a man could enter his mother's womb twice, esoteric insights from the Kabbalah into his own religion, as the Christ admonished. Art thou the master of Israel, and knowest not these things? Might have furnished the Pharisees with the insight needed to distinguish the physical uterus from the Kamarupa, namely the womb of the physical man from the chrysalis of the spiritual man. Now, let's just stop about this. Could it be that within ourselves, of our own creation, that each one of us actually will produce ourselves our own womb? It appears that this next phase of death does not require the physical womb, but it does appear and is implied that there is a spiritual womb. Well, that's really weird. The second possible inference is to do with spiritual rebirth in the present lifetime. In the mysteries, it was customary to refer to initiates as phoenixes, or men who had been born again. For just a physical birth gives man consciousness in the physical world, so the neophyte, after the various degrees of initiation in the womb of the mysteries, was born into a consciousness of the spiritual world. Did y'all get that? The reason why I like this paper is that it gives some key things to the mystery schools. This is one of them. And I know there's a number of you that seek these same things. So really dig what's being said here. So again, you can see where the Christian ideology got this from. They just simply painted it, their own special colors. So this is interesting. So the second possible is not saying it is, it's just that it's possible inference is to do with spiritual birth in the present lifetime. Think about this. Maybe that some of us have been in that second birth. It's travail, right? In the mysteries, it was customary to refer to initiates as phoenixes, or men who had been born again. For just a physical birth gives man consciousness in the physical world, so the neophyte, after various degrees of initiation in the womb of the mysteries, I would dare say that's what all of us are doing here. The material covered on this channel would definitely imply that. Was born into a consciousness of the spiritual world. What this means in practical terms is that all burdensome encumbrances such as material possessions, sensual cravings, outworn intellectual concepts, and religious incrustations must be sloughed off. Otherwise, it is easier for a camel to go through the needle's eye for such a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And I got to tell you what, about 3.5 decades ago, that one really fucked with my mind. And it just did. I know the story behind that one, but anyway, I'll move on. Significantly, a similar proverb in the biblical gospel is in the Holy Quran. To those who reject our signs and treat them with arrogance, no opening will be there of the gates of heaven, nor will they enter the garden until the camel can pass through the eye of the needle. Such is our reward for those in sin. Before inquiring into these heavenly things, what does the Christ mean by the terms man and the kingdom of God? The former obviously does not refer to the physical man who has died, but to the upper middle principles, the human soul, strictly speaking, and human ego. The latter refers to what is known in occultism as the Devachan. We move on to consider the life and consciousness of man in the Devachan, the state intermediate between the two lives on earth, into which the higher ego enters after the second death, after its separation from its lower aspects and sheaths. Wow. Okay. Well, we'll pick this up tomorrow. And we'll be introducing another paper, just to give you an idea where we're going. So we'll be covering, this one is the Natural Afterlife Discoveries. This is an exciting paper in that it brings out some new science evidence, things that we're discovering about death on a level that we haven't ever seen before. I mean, you've got AI now involved in death and what it means. Quantum computing. Do you know that the technology giants, Amazon, Microsoft, and others, they spend buku bucks about death? Did you know that? Yeah. Yeah, you see, Gates and the rest of them, Bezos, Musk has admitted this on Joe Rogan. They're afraid of death. They're dying. They know they're dying. And you've got them doing some weird shit, man. But it's because of what this afterlife is. So anyway, we'll get into also death and the soul consciousness, just to let you know what's coming down the pike. Well, another one will be the philosophy of death, death and funeral customs. This is another fascinating paper. So anyway, let me stop there and move on here. So I hope you've enjoyed it. It's an interesting topic for me. I know it is for many of you as well. And I can assure you, by the time we get done with this, we will probably be some of the more educated groups out there and understanding about death. And you can see it's a complicated thing. I mean, it's going to happen, but wow. I guess if you want to talk about the miraculous, wow, it's there in things. Hey, Rabbit Hole Driver, how you doing? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Orjuan, good to see you as well. Good to see you, sir. Spring Equinox. Yeah. Flight Risk, how are you doing? Thank you. And we're going to continue on it. This is one, I mean, again, we'll definitely be able to, at least be able to play Jeopardy, right? Hey, Jules, what's up? Good to see you. Mary Wins, much love to you, darn. Brian, 1958, thank you, brother. Voices over by Brown Butterfly. Voiceover, thank you. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Jeanette, good to thank you. Thank you. Claudette, good to see you, my dear. Lori, hello. All right, everyone, have yourself a fabulous Thursday. It's Thursday, as they would say. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that, brother. Bonnie, right back at you, darling. Rage Against the Machine. Answers, get a Ouija board. The problem is, got to ask who's actually answering the question, Is it really something on the portal on the other side, or is it what's inside of us? Ooh. All right. Much love, everybody. Thank you all, and we'll get together tomorrow. All right. Until then, keep singing a song.